Hey everyone, so bit of a new format today. I just picked up a Logitech G29 wheel, and I've got a USB handbrake as well. Now, I haven't used a wheel with any Forza Horizon game yet, and I've heard that at launch wheel support was a bit rough here for Horizon 4, but from what I hear, it's gotten better over time. So I'm going to give a sort of opinion piece on whether or not it's worth it to buy and use a wheel for Horizon 4. Now, I have had this wheel for about 2 weeks, so I've had some time to get used to it, but let's get on the road here in a familiar car and familiar track, and I'm just going to go over some of my initial thoughts I had when I bought the wheel and how I feel now after having it a few weeks. Okay, so to start off, I'm going to be using the default just plug and play settings for both the wheel's own software and for Horizon 4. I'm also going to be playing on simulation steering and my regular assists, which is ABS on and pretty much everything else off. So we're here on my test track in a familiar car with some good road conditions, and I think the first impression that I got with this wheel was that it was incredibly responsive. Every little change I made would affect the car's handling, and I know that might sound like a total duh moment, but with the controller you really get a lot of slack because obviously an analog stick isn't exactly like a real car's wheel, so the game has to do a lot of guesswork to assume what you mean when you're rapidly tapping the analog stick one way and then rapidly going the other way, which is something you essentially can't do so fast with an actual steering wheel. So with this racing wheel, every little change you make has an immediate and quite noticeable effect on the car, which weirdly enough, definitely took some getting used to. Now, I'm in an A-class car right now because I wanted to drive something familiar, and it's also because I strongly recommend that if you do pick up a wheel for Forza, that you start off on a lower class because you really do need to relearn how to drive a bit. And I feel like it's probably a common mistake to just get out in your X-Class car that you're used to driving with a controller or maybe even a keyboard, and then you get in the wheel and realize it's almost impossible to drive the car. I think a lot of people will assume that if you drive in real life or even have any racing experience, you'll be able to just jump right into this, but there is a learning curve. Although it's similar, you kind of have to go through this mental rewiring before it starts to feel the same, but for the first week or so, at least in my experience and from talking to some other people, there's definitely this mental rewiring kind of learning curve where you have to figure out what the subtle differences are between driving in real life and driving in a sim where, of course, you feel everything through the wheel and you can't really feel the car through the rest of your body. Now, one of the things I found most interesting, and this will actually come up later when I start getting into drifting too, is that this actually changed the way I tune my cars as well. Now, it doesn't make a huge difference if you already have well-tuned road cars or even well-tuned rally cars, but you'll definitely notice that your preferences might change. For example, on a controller, I like driving cars that are a bit more oversteer prone than understeer because it's easier to manage that on the controller and I like the extra turn in. But on the wheel, it just feels a bit too twitchy, so I've actually gone more to tuning for understeer, which is, to be honest, a bit more realistic to real life, especially in rear-wheel drive cars, and that's super cool to see. There are a lot of liberties you can take when tuning a car in normal steering while playing with a controller, but it really focuses you to focus more on the car's handling feel once you have a wheel. So I'm a big fan of that. Another thing it does is give you a bit more of a sense of speed. Again, with this game being so well tuned for controllers, it almost feels too easy to drive really high power crazy cars with the controller. But if you jump into a game like even Motorsport or Assetto Corsa or any more realistic sim game, the sense of speed and reaction time you need at driving these high power cars is insane. But in Horizon, they've always been good at scaling the difficulty a lot more linearly and making it so that even these ridiculous fast cars are still pretty manageable. But again, adding in that sim wheel into the mix takes that away a little bit, not to a point where I think it's unfair, but just to a point where I feel it's a bit more realistic and, if I may say it, immersive. Which, to be honest, if you're getting a wheel, that's probably kind of what you're going for anyway. So to summarize my opinions with road racing with this wheel after around 2 weeks, it definitely elevates the experiences of driving lower class cars, and you almost kind of have to relearn your way up to higher class cars. When you do get to those higher class cars though, I just feel like you're at an advantage with the controller. Although you do get a lot more control with braking, acceleration, throttle control, and of course steering input, it just seems so much more twitchy than it does on a controller, where the game is kind of doing some of the work for you. So on lower class cars, I really enjoyed being able to manage my driving line better, and especially my throttle control. I found myself really not ever drifting, where on a controller, it can sometimes be tough to keep your grip. So at the end of the day, if your thing is cruising in low class cars through the open world, a wheel will definitely add to that experience. But for road racing anyway, owning this wheel is a bit of a mixed bag. But let's now hop over into Rally and see what my thoughts are there. Now, Rally was probably what I was most excited for, and I think especially given my initial impressions with road racing feeling a bit twitchy, at least before you get used to it, I thought that Rally might hit that good spot of having the extra controllability with the wheel, but without having that twitchiness, because being on a less grippy surface means that your car will react a bit slower to inputs. And well, that's pretty much exactly how it went. Rally is an absolute blast with this wheel. So again, I hopped in a familiar car and just took to some winter roads, and it felt awesome. The cars, at least in mid to lower classes, drove great, felt fun to drive, and the force feedback, at least on this G29 here, actually did a pretty good job of telling me how much traction I did or didn't have just through the feeling in the wheel. I didn't really feel like my tunes needed to be adapted here either, because some of that twitchiness, like I was talking about earlier, went away. It was just much easier to utilize the controlled oversteer that you want for rally racing. But this does bring up another point. I'm sure if you know about Forza, you've probably heard of the Dirt series of games as well. And I have tried this wheel out for Dirt, and I've got to say, if you're looking for a more realistic and honestly really intense rally driving experience, there's just nothing better than the Dirt Rally games. So in honesty, although I think Rally is really fun in Forza Horizon, there's just kind of always that thought in the back of my head that, well, I could just be playing Dirt Rally. So let's hop over into something that I've been very curious to try, and something you can't do in the Dirt games: street drifting. So if you're starting to notice a theme here, the first thing I did was hop in a familiar low-class car and go to a familiar spot of the map. Now, I knew drifting would be the most difficult to learn on a wheel because it's so much more about the feel of the car and having quick reaction time. Where with race and rally, you can sometimes get away with just driving a bit more slow and careful. You really have to be understanding what the car is doing and where the weight is for drifting, which can be hard to convey through a sim wheel setup. So needless to say, I struggled with this the most, and I think it's a great place to point out actually that Forza uses some kind of cheaty physics, and the force feedback just doesn't really convey accurately what drifting really feels like and what your handwork should be. So you really have to kind of rewire yourself a lot to pick up on the different cues the game is trying to tell you and adapt your driving style in order to drift with a wheel. And this is a place where adapting your tune can be huge, with a controller being able to go from full steering lock in one direction immediately to the other direction almost instantly can be a huge help with Forza, and it allows you to run really crazy alignment settings without actually spinning out. But with a wheel, you're obviously more restricted to slower steering input, so you need to tune a little bit more moderate and a little bit more realistic, which again, I do appreciate. Now I know, especially for drifting, your wheel settings can play a big role in how the car feels, and you can even adjust how much wheel rotation is needed to go from full steering lock to full steering lock in the other direction. However, again, for this video, I wanted to keep everything stock. Moving forward with the game, and especially if you guys are more interested in more wheel content, I'll start playing more with settings, but for now, this brings up another point, which also came up with Rally. There's just another game that's much better at drifting, at least in my opinion, and that game is Assetto Corsa. I'm going to throw up some footage here of that from, I think, within the first couple days I owned the wheel. That game feels great. It feels very, very similar to drifting a real car, and I was able to pick that up much quicker than I was with Forza, which is kind of a bit funny because you would think Forza, being the more arcade game, would be easier. But I think this is just one of the pitfalls that Forza has with wheel settings. Is Forza is just built and designed around using an Xbox controller. The whole physics and handling model in Horizon is just built for a controller. And there are other games that are meant to be more sim experiences and built for the wheel. So even though in Forza, with enough practice, you can definitely learn to link corners with drifting and be pretty decent, it just doesn't feel like real drifting. Games like Assetto Corsa or Dirt for Rally manage to nail the feeling so much better. So to wrap things up here and give you guys a summary, at the end of the day, I don't really think a wheel is worth it just for Horizon. But if you already have one, or if you like to play other games like Dirt or Assetto Corsa, even Motorsport, it definitely can be a fun experience. But for now, I think I'll stick with my Xbox controller when I'm playing Horizon. Now, if you do want to see me using this wheel more with Forza or with other games, of course, definitely let me know. I've been kind of branching out and playing games like Dirt and Assetto now that I have this wheel, so I think it might be fun to do kind of some more raw driving footage runs, maybe with some commentary thrown in there as well. So just let me know what your thoughts are either way. And guys, that just about wraps it up for my video on whether or not it's worth it to use a wheel in Horizon 4. This was definitely a bit of a departure from my regular content, but I picked up the wheel and felt like I had to make at least one video on it. So I will see you in the next video, guys. Thank you for watching. Bye.